My friends, life is full of uncertainties. Each day we wake up not knowing what lies ahead. We plan, we prepare, and we strive, but sometimes life takes turns we never expected. Maybe you're facing uncertainty today. Maybe you're asking, what's next for me? Let me remind you, God knows what's next for you. You may not see the road ahead, but God does. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, and He knows where you are, and He knows where you're going. Nothing takes Him by surprise. The Bible tells us that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. That means if you trust Him, He is guiding your path, even when the road seems unclear. Fear or faith, which will you choose? Fear is the enemy of faith. Fear whispers, you are lost, you have no future. But faith declares God is in control. Think about the great men and women of faith in history. Abraham didn't know where he was going, but he followed God. Moses didn't know how the Red Sea would part, but he trusted God. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned, yet God was preparing him for a throne. What you see as a dead end may actually be a divine detour leading you to something greater. When you feel stuck, remember, delay is not denial. You may feel like your prayers are unanswered, like doors are closing instead of opening, but delay does not mean denial. The waiting season is often God's preparation season. A farmer does not plant a seed and expect a harvest the next day. He trusts the process. Your season of waiting is not wasted. God is working behind the scenes, aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right moments. Your trials are not the end. They are a setup for something greater. You may be in the middle of a storm, but storms do not last forever. Every challenge, every trial, every setback is a stepping stone to something greater. God never wastes a painful season. He uses it to build your faith, to refine your character, and to prepare you for what's ahead. God's timing is always perfect. We live in a world that rushes everything. We want instant results, but God does not work on human timelines. He works in perfect timing. If God is making you wait, it's because what He has for you is greater than what you could ever imagine. Do you believe that? Do you trust that God's plan is better than yours? Step forward in faith, my friend. If you know that God is in control, what should you fear? If He knows what's next for you, why should you doubt? It is time to step forward in faith, not because you have all the answers, but because you know the one who does. God knows what's next for you. Your job is to trust Him, obey His word, and walk in faith no matter where you are today. God is not finished with your story. He has a plan, a purpose, and a future for you. Keep believing, keep trusting, and when you don't know what's next, rest in the truth that God does. God bless you. Life is complex, unpredictable, and often overwhelming. Each of us is on a journey, moving forward into the unknown, shaped by our past, but not entirely determined by it. The future is uncertain, chaotic even, but that does not mean it is random or without order. There is a structure beneath the apparent randomness of life, a framework guiding existence itself. And that structure is not something you or I have to invent. It is already there, built into the fabric of reality. You might call it the hand of destiny, the arc of history, or the invisible order of the universe, but the truth remains the same. There is a pattern, a direction, a purpose beyond what we can immediately perceive. The challenge, of course, is that we do not know what lies ahead. We can strategize, we can calculate, and we can make informed decisions, but ultimately, we do not have full control. No one does. The arrogant assume they do. They believe they can map out every detail of their lives and dictate every outcome. But such thinking is naive at best and dangerously misguided at worst. Reality does not conform to human wishes. It operates on principles far beyond our understanding. And yet, despite our limitations, despite our inability to see the full picture, there is something guiding the process. Consider the complexity of a single human life. Billions of factors interact to shape the course of an individual's path. Genetics, culture, environment, personal choices, All of these intertwine in ways we can never fully grasp. And yet people often look at their circumstances and think they have been abandoned to chaos. They become anxious, frustrated, even resentful. They fear what the future holds because they cannot control it. But fear of the unknown is no excuse for despair. The unknown is not something to be feared. It is something to be confronted. It is where all potential exists. There is an idea, ancient and powerful, that speaks to this reality, the notion that life is structured in such a way that meaning can be discovered within it. You don't create meaning out of thin air. It is something that is already embedded in the structure of existence. And if that is true, if there is an inherent order in the universe, then it follows that the future is not an abyss of meaningless chaos, but rather an unfolding of something greater than what we currently perceive. This suggests that what happens next is not a random occurrence, but something that fits within a larger purpose. Now, this is not an excuse for complacency. This is not an argument for passivity or blind optimism. It is a call to responsibility. It means that your actions matter, that the way you engage with the world influences not only your own trajectory, but the trajectory of those around you. It means that your choices should not be made out of fear, desperation, or selfish ambition, but rather out of a recognition that you are participating in something much larger than yourself. You might say, well, I don't see the pattern. I don't see the purpose. All I see is suffering and confusion. And that is understandable. Life is filled with suffering. That is an undeniable reality. But suffering does not negate meaning. In fact, suffering is often the pathway to deeper understanding. It is in the midst of difficulty that you develop strength, wisdom, and resilience. The trials you endure today may be the very experiences that prepare you for what is ahead. Imagine a person who has lost everything, someone who has been betrayed, who has faced failure, who has been left with nothing but uncertainty. Such a person might be tempted to conclude that life is meaningless, that all is lost. But history tells us otherwise. It tells us that those who persevere, who continue forward despite their suffering, often find that their greatest hardships were actually necessary steps in their journey. What appears to be chaos in the moment is often revealed to be order in hindsight. The path only makes sense when looking backward, but it must be walked forward. This is why trust is necessary. Not a naive trust that everything will be easy, but a deep recognition that despite the suffering, despite the unknown, despite the fear, there is a direction, a structure, a purpose beyond what we can currently see. If you acknowledge that, then you are not just wandering aimlessly through life. You are participating in something meaningful, and that means you have a responsibility to act accordingly. So what do? You step forward. You take responsibility. You make the best decisions you can with the information you have. And you trust that if you continue forward with integrity, discipline, and courage, the next step will reveal itself in due time. It may not happen immediately. It may not happen in the way you expect. But if you are aligned with truth, if you are striving toward what is good, then what is next for you will be exactly what is necessary. The question, then, is not whether the future is planned out in some deterministic sense. The question is whether you will choose to align yourself with the order that already exists. Will you trust that there is a reason you are here, a reason for the challenges you face, a reason for the uncertainty ahead? Or will you allow fear to paralyze you? There is no standing still in life. You're either moving forward or falling behind. You're either growing into who you are meant to be, or you are retreating into fear and resentment. Choose to move forward. Choose to act with courage. Choose to believe that what is next for you is not an accident, but part of something greater than you can yet comprehend. Life is unpredictable, and the unknown stretches before us like an open abyss. Every person must contend with this reality, the fact that the future remains uncertain, and that no matter how much we plan, control will always be elusive. The natural response to this is fear. Fear of making the wrong choice. Fear of failure. Fear of suffering, fear of what we do not know. And yet, despite this, we move forward. Why? Because there is something more fundamental than fear, something that allows us to progress despite our inability to see the full picture. That something is trust. Trust in the structure of reality itself. Trust that there is an order to the chaos. Trust that if we take a step forward, the ground will be there to meet us. Now, fear is not inherently bad. Fear is necessary. It is an ancient mechanism that keeps us alive. It prevents us from walking blindly into disaster. It forces us to be cautious, to prepare, to recognize danger before it consumes us. But fear that is unchecked, fear that is given too much control, does not protect. It paralyzes. It keeps people stagnant, locked in place, unwilling to move forward because the risks seem too great. It is a tyrant that whispers that the unknown is always dangerous, that the future is always something to be dreaded rather than confronted. But this is a lie. The unknown is not just a source of danger. It is the place where all potential exists. It is the field from which everything that is meaningful emerges. Every new opportunity, every new discovery, every act of creation comes from stepping into what is not yet known. To refuse to face the unknown is to refuse growth, to refuse transformation, to refuse to become more than what you are today. And that is not a path anyone should willingly choose. Yet people do choose it, often without realizing it. They let fear dictate their lives. They stay in situations that are comfortable but unfulfilling because the alternative is too uncertain. They avoid making difficult decisions because they might fail. They refuse to speak because they might be wrong. They shrink away from challenge because they might suffer. And in doing so, they imprison themselves in a world that becomes smaller and smaller, not because reality itself is shrinking, but because their willingness to engage with it has diminished. The alternative to fear is trust. And trust is not naive optimism. It is not pretending that everything will always work out exactly as we wish. That is not trust. That is delusion. Trust is something far more grounded. It is the recognition that while we do not know what will happen next, there is still a path forward, that if we act with integrity, if we take responsibility, if we move forward with discipline and courage, then we will be able to contend with whatever challenges arise. Trust is the belief that there is a way through the chaos, even if we do not yet see it. Think about how we navigate everyday life. When you drive on the highway, you trust that the other drivers will stay in their lanes. When you walk into a building, you trust that it was built on a solid foundation. When you begin a new job, you trust that your effort will lead to some kind of progress. If you had to be absolutely certain of everything before taking action, you would never move at all. Life does not allow for complete certainty. It demands that we act in faith, not blind faith, but faith grounded in the recognition that we must move forward despite not knowing everything. Now, trust is not something that is given freely. It must be developed. It is something that grows as a result of repeated experiences, as a result of seeing that when we act with responsibility, we are able to contend with the challenges we face. But that means we must act first. We cannot wait for trust to magically appear before we take a step forward. We must step forward first, and trust is built in the process. This is not easy. It requires discipline. It requires effort. It requires a willingness to confront what is difficult rather than retreat from it. And it requires the recognition that failure, while painful, is not the end. Failure is information. It teaches us what does not work. It refines us. It strengthens us. But only if we are willing to learn from it. If we let fear dictate our response to failure, then failure becomes something we avoid at all costs. And in avoiding failure, we also avoid success. Because success is built on the foundation of lessons learned from failure. So what does this mean practically? It means that when you are faced with uncertainty, when you do not know what to do next, when the future looms before you like an overwhelming force, you do not freeze. You do not shrink back. You do not let fear decide for you. You take the next step, however small, however uncertain. You trust that if you continue to move forward, if you continue to act with responsibility and integrity, then the path will become clearer. That is the alternative to fear. That is the way out of paralysis. And that is the foundation upon which all meaningful progress is built. You cannot eliminate fear, but you can refuse to let it be the master of your life. You can choose to trust instead, to trust that you are capable, to trust that the future is not just a source of suffering, but a field of potential, and to trust that if you continue forward, you will find your way. Life does not unfold according to our schedules. That much is certain. We may want things to happen immediately. We may expect success, clarity, and resolution on our terms, but reality does not bend to our demands. Instead, we find ourselves waiting for opportunities, waiting for breakthroughs, waiting for direction. And that waiting can be agonizing. It feels like stagnation, like wasted time, like being trapped in a limbo where nothing is happening. But that is not true. Waiting is not passive. It is not meaningless. It is preparation. The time you spend waiting is the time you are being shaped for what comes next. You might not see it while it is happening, but if you are attentive, if you refuse to fall into bitterness or despair, you will recognize that you are being forged in the fire of patience. You are learning things you would not otherwise learn. You are developing qualities that will be necessary for the future you are hoping for. But that only happens if you approach the waiting with the right mindset. If you treat the waiting as an injustice, as something to resent, you will squander the opportunity it presents. People often assume that if something is delayed, it has been denied. They think that if they do not get what they want immediately, it means they will never get it at all. And so they become frustrated, they complain, they give up. They convince themselves that they have been forgotten, that they have been overlooked, that nothing will ever change. But that is a dangerous perspective because it leads to hopelessness. And hopelessness breeds inaction. Consider the individual who has been working toward a goal for years and sees no visible progress. The entrepreneur struggling to build a business. The artist whose work is yet unrecognized. The student who feels lost in their studies. They look around and wonder why others seem to be advancing while they remain stuck. It is easy in that moment to conclude that something is wrong, that they are failing, that they are wasting their time. But what if they are simply being prepared? What if the work they are doing, even though it does not seem to be leading anywhere yet, is actually laying the foundation for what is to come? This is a hard truth to accept because it demands patience, and patience is difficult. It requires discipline. It requires endurance. It requires faith in the process. People want results. They want evidence that their efforts are paying off. But the most significant transformations happen beneath the surface in ways that are not immediately visible. Just as a tree's roots grow deep underground long before its branches reach the sky, so too does human development often take place in ways that are hidden from immediate view. If you are in a season of waiting, the question you must ask yourself is this: are you using the time wisely, or are you wasting it? Are you learning, growing, refining your skills, and strengthening your character, or are you merely complaining, giving in to frustration, and allowing impatience to consume you? The way you answer that question will determine what happens when the waiting comes to an end, because the waiting will end. At some point, the opportunity will come. The door will open. The moment you have been preparing for will arrive. And when it does, you will either be ready or you will not. The waiting is not the problem. The problem is what you do with it. If you allow it to make you bitter, if you use it as an excuse to stop trying, then you will find that when the opportunity finally comes, you are not prepared to take it. But if you use the waiting as a time to refine yourself, to gain knowledge, to develop discipline, then when the time comes, you will be ready. Think about history. The most extraordinary figures did not simply stumble into greatness. They went through long periods of obscurity, of difficulty, of struggle. The leader who spent years in exile before stepping into power, the writer who faced rejection after rejection before finally being recognized, the scientist who labored in frustration before making a breakthrough. If they had given up in the waiting, they would never have reached their full potential. They would have forfeited the future that was waiting for them. So do not despise the waiting. Do not see it as an obstacle. See it as a necessary part of the journey. Because if you cannot endure the waiting, you will not be able to handle what comes next. The greater the responsibility, the greater the preparation required, and sometimes that preparation takes longer than you would like. The question is not whether the waiting will end. It will. The question is whether you will be ready when it does. The question is whether you will emerge from the waiting better, stronger, wiser, or whether you will allow it to break you. That is up to you. There are moments in life when everything seems to collapse at once. The path you thought you were walking suddenly vanishes. The plans you made unravel, and the certainty you relied on is stripped away. It is in those moments that people begin to question everything. Why is this happening? What did I do wrong? Is there any purpose to this suffering? These are not trivial questions. They are the kind of questions that have haunted human beings for centuries because they arise from the deepest recesses of the human experience. Pain is an unavoidable part of existence. It is not something that can be wished away, ignored, or permanently avoided. It comes in different forms: loss, betrayal, failure, sickness, disappointment. No one is exempt from it. And yet, people often react to suffering as if it is a mistake, as if life has somehow gone off course. They assume that pain is evidence that something has gone wrong, that they are being punished, that they have been forgotten. But suffering is not necessarily a detour. It is often the road itself. The idea that life should be free from suffering is a dangerous illusion. If you expect existence to be smooth, if you believe that things should always go according to plan, then when suffering inevitably comes, you will be unprepared. You will be crushed under the weight of it because you will not have developed the internal strength necessary to endure it. This is one of the fundamental challenges of human life. Learning to bear suffering without being destroyed by it. But how is that possible? How does one endure suffering without collapsing? The answer lies in meaning. Human beings are not just creatures of instinct. They are creatures of purpose. They can withstand almost anything if they believe there is meaning in it. History is filled with examples of individuals who endured unimaginable hardship. Prisoners in labor camps, survivors of war, people who face loss beyond comprehension. What allowed some of them to persevere while others crumbled? It was not merely physical resilience. It was the presence of meaning. Suffering without meaning is unbearable. It becomes nothing more than a source of despair. But suffering with meaning is transformed. It becomes a test, a trial, a process of refinement. It is not easy. It does not mean that the pain disappears, but it does mean that the pain is not pointless. It means that what is happening is shaping you, strengthening you, preparing you for what is next. It means that as difficult as the moment is, it is not wasted. People often make the mistake of thinking that meaning will reveal itself immediately. They want an explanation for their suffering right now. But meaning is rarely obvious in the moment. It is something that becomes clear over time, in hindsight, when you look back and see how the pieces fit together. The challenge is to trust that meaning exists even when you cannot yet see it. This is where many people struggle. They want certainty. They want to know why things are happening before they decide how to respond. But life does not work that way. Meaning is something that is often discovered in the process of enduring suffering, not before it. And that means that you must be willing to press forward even when you do not understand why things are happening the way they are. The question then is not whether you will suffer. That is guaranteed. The question is whether you will allow your suffering to define you in a way that makes you weaker or in a way that makes you stronger. Will you allow your pain to turn you into someone resentful, bitter, and broken? Or will you use it as an opportunity to develop resilience, wisdom, and depth of character? This is not about minimizing suffering. It is not about pretending that pain does not hurt. It is about recognizing that how you respond to suffering determines whether it becomes something that crushes you, or something that transforms you. Imagine two individuals who experience the same tragedy. One descends into hopelessness, convinced that life is nothing more than meaningless suffering. The other, despite the pain, continues forward, refusing to give up. Over time, the second individual emerges stronger, not because the pain was easy, but because they chose to endure it with purpose. They chose to believe that even though they could not yet see the full picture, there was something beyond the suffering, something worth pressing on for. That is the choice you must make. No one escapes suffering, but you can choose how you engage with it. You can choose whether it leaves you broken or whether it shapes you into someone more capable, more compassionate, more prepared for the future. It is tempting to believe that suffering is a mistake, that it is something to be avoided at all costs. But the reality is that suffering is often the very thing that prepares you for what comes next. It is the fire that refines, the storm that strengthens, the challenge that forces growth. The road ahead is uncertain. There will be pain, there will be loss, but there will also be meaning if you choose to seek it. And if you can endure, if you can press forward despite the hardship, then one day when you look back, you will see that what you thought was the end was actually the beginning. You will see that what seemed like chaos was actually shaping you in ways you could not yet understand. So do not give in to despair. Do not let suffering define you in a way that makes you weaker. Let it be the thing that strengthens you. Let it be the thing that prepares you for what is next. Because what comes next is not random, it is not meaningless, and it is not beyond you. Life is structured around choices. Every day, in every moment, you are confronted with decisions, some small, some monumental, that determine the course of your existence. The weight of this responsibility can be overwhelming, and many people struggle with uncertainty, paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong move. They hesitate, overthink, and sometimes they do nothing at all, hoping that by avoiding the choice, they also avoid the consequence. But inaction is itself a decision, and more often than not, it is the worst one you can make. People want certainty before they act. They want guarantees that their decisions will lead to success, that their efforts will be rewarded, that the path they choose will be free of suffering. But reality does not provide those guarantees. The world is unpredictable, complex, and often unforgiving. No matter how much you plan, no matter how carefully you analyze the variables, there will always be unknowns. This is why waiting for absolute certainty before acting is a mistake. It is an impossible standard. You will never know everything. You will never have complete control over the outcome. But what you do have is the ability to take responsibility for your choices. And that is far more powerful than people often realize. Taking responsibility means recognizing that while you cannot control everything, you can control how you respond. You can control whether you move forward with integrity, discipline, and courage. But responsibility is difficult. It requires effort. It demands sacrifice. It means acknowledging that you are not a passive observer of your own life, but an active participant. And that realization can be terrifying because it eliminates the ability to blame external forces for your failures. If you take responsibility, then you must also accept that your failures are, at least in part, your own doing. And that is a hard truth to swallow. Many people avoid responsibility for precisely this reason. They would rather see themselves as victims of circumstance, as individuals at the mercy of forces beyond their control. It is easier that way. It absolves them of the need to act. If their failures are always someone else's fault, if it is society or their parents or bad luck, then they do not have to change. They do not have to put in the effort to improve. But the problem with this mindset is that it leads nowhere. It keeps people stuck. If you refuse to take responsibility, you surrender control over your own life. You become a spectator rather than a participant. You drift, waiting for things to improve on their own rather than taking the steps necessary to create a better future. This does not mean that external factors are irrelevant. Life is unfair. Some people are born into difficult circumstances. Some people face hardships that are not their fault. But even in the face of injustice, the principle remains the same. What matters is how you respond. Do you allow yourself to be defeated? Or do you take responsibility for what you can control and move forward despite the obstacles? Taking responsibility does not mean you will always succeed. It does not mean that every decision you make will lead to prosperity and happiness. You will make mistakes. You will fail. You will encounter setbacks that seem insurmountable. But responsibility is not about guaranteeing success. It is about ensuring that your failures are learning experiences rather than reasons to quit. When you take responsibility, failure becomes information. It tells you what does not work. It helps you refine your approach. It forces you to become better, sharper, more competent. And that is how growth occurs. Not through waiting for certainty, but through acting, failing, learning, and acting again. The alternative to responsibility is regret. If you refuse to take action, if you let fear and uncertainty dictate your choices, then years from now you will look back and wonder what could have been. You will wonder how your life might have been different if you had taken the risk, if you had stepped forward instead of shrinking back. And regret is far more painful than failure, because failure comes with the opportunity to try again, while regret is often permanent. So when faced with uncertainty, do not retreat into paralysis. Do not wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment does not exist. What exists is the opportunity to act, to take responsibility, to move forward despite the unknowns. If you do this, you may not always succeed, but you will always be in motion. You will always be learning, and you will always be preparing yourself for what comes next. The world does not reward passivity. It rewards those who are willing to step into the unknown, to take responsibility for their choices, and to bear the consequences with resilience. So do not let uncertainty stop you. Make the choice, take the step, and trust that whatever happens, you will be able to contend with it